Today we're joined by Alex Oakden, Director at Scope 3. In this episode, Alex shares his unique perspective on technology optimisation and sustainability in the digital ecosystem. He highlights the importance of strategic technology adoption, warning against the magpie syndrome of collecting unnecessary tech tools.
We'll chuck a bunch of stuff against the wall and see if it sticks. And that kind of is great if you're a big corporation because you can afford to do that, but that's probably where a lot of the startups or scale-ups tend to make the mistakes.
Alex has a passion for efficiency and reducing technological waste. He advocates for clear communication between leadership and technology teams, emphasising the need to invest only in technologies that genuinely improve business performance.
Really stick to your guns. Like, you got to this point because you had a really good idea, and the more advice you take along that journey, it may dilute you away from that goal.
Throughout this episode, Alex also shares sound business advice and real words of wisdom, making this conversation as insightful as it is practical. This is a must-listen episode packed with takeaways on leadership, sustainability, and making smarter tech decisions. Enjoy! Alex, let's talk data.
Absolutely.
So we're going to talk a few things today. But firstly, welcome to sunny Manchester.
I know, we've just been talking about how nice it is and how I don't know whether to wear a coat or not.
Yeah, 4 seasons in a day currently.
Absolutely.
We're enjoying. But how often do you come up to Manchester? Because I know it's a place you know quite well.
Yeah, so I know it well mainly through football matches, to be honest. I was very lucky enough to go to Manchester versus Liverpool, I think last season, 2-2. One of my friends works at Tezos, which is one of the sponsors, so got to go there, which was great. And it's nice. Obviously, I was in Singapore for 7 years, 6.5 years. And in that, I think it's changed massively. I remember everybody's talking to me about Deansgate. It's like the place to be now and everything else. And I've just...
It was maybe, I don't know if
not
it's
anymore.
now. No.
Not fair enough. So it's actually been great. So even just running around the city today, just seeing everything that's changed and going up, and quite a young city as well, actually. Everyone, seems to be doing something good, which is great.
Yeah, and we'll come on to Singapore because obviously I've got the Asian connection, I suppose, with living in Tokyo for 6 years, which is always interesting. But I suppose we'll start with waste. And obviously waste is an issue in a lot of industries, but it's not often a word associated so much with technology and data. Sustainability is becoming a bigger topic, but I know tech optimization is a big part of, strategy, and there's so much money wasted, and ROI is the key word. Yep. I mean, I know from even having a small business, I've wasted so much money on, I think as humans, we're like magpies and the shiny new thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
Tech people probably worse because they're like, wow, this is going to enable X, Y, and Z. So what mistakes do you see companies making, and what can we do, I suppose, not to over-engineer technology stacks?
I mean, great first question. How I often describe, you use magpies, there's a bunch of ways you can describe it. I kind of usually describe it to people as, do you know that top drawer that you've got in your house or your mum's house, which is just like full of 20, 30 wires that you have no idea what they do, but you just keep them anyway, just in case the HTC One's going to come back and everyone's going to start using it again. And so that's kind of how I think about and how I've seen and how I've experienced technology stacks. There's kind of like two ends of the scale on waste. For me, there is like waste which is procurement led. And so this is probably one of the ones that I learned most when I was at Google, which was we've bought a product or technology to deliver an outcome, and whether or not that product is delivering that outcome doesn't necessarily mean whether they keep it or not. And it's just more of it's going to take me so long to get this analytics signed off by my procurement team again. I'm just going to keep it and buy the next thing. And then they almost like add and stack. And one of the main reasons why I got so passionate about this space is that I looked at a bunch of data around how many products do people log into in a day-to-day sort of office job. And it was around 17, which if you think about it, to be an expert in anything beyond Gmail, maybe the product you sell and, some automation tool internally, that's a lot of products to be logged into. So inherently that becomes kind of this big waste pit. And then on the left-hand side, which is probably better, but still inherently wasteful, is on the innovation side. So we're trying to drive to our objective. We need everything we can, and we'll chuck a bunch of stuff against the wall and see if it sticks. And that kind of is great if you're a big corporation because you can afford to do that. But that's probably where a lot of the startups or scale-ups tend to make the mistakes, which is I need to act like a big technology company. I need a bunch of technology to deliver it. And I can't really afford in 12 months to keep up those licenses. So I think that's becoming decommoditized, I guess, or commoditized by AI and a bunch of like new technologies being introduced. But for me, there's kind of innovation, which is great but has waste, but then there's just pure procurement red tape waste, which really frustrated me, to be honest.
How do you understand what is nice to have and what you need? Because I suppose even with AI, what Gen AI are you going to interact with? Because there's a ton of them, and I know I'm just like this one, that one, that one. I don't utilize one, I utilize many, and that's probably costing me more money, and it's frustrating, and you're having the same conversation. So how do you gauge that really, and how should organizations make those decisions?
Yeah, I think it's really simple, but by being simple, it's not simple, if that makes sense. It probably doesn't make sense, but like having that clear objective of like, what are we trying to achieve as a business? And then inherently doing an evaluation of which technology do we think that will enable us to get there. So I think like today with LLMs, for example, any of the AI products or even cloud-based products, maybe you're not sure because maybe they're going to develop new features, and that's kind of on that end of innovation, right? So maybe I need a few, and then we'll figure it out, and then we'll do that assessment at the end. But really, I think the communication from, if you're in the business of selling shoes, what technology is going to enable me to sell more shoes? And sometimes I think what happens is that communication from tops down to maybe the ICT department, they start to then get dragged into that innovation race, and maybe some of that product won't drive bottom line sales of shoes, but it maybe looks good on a case study, or it makes us look good in the industry. And I think that is inherently where I think companies could do a much better job from stakeholder down communication to say, we need to only invest in stuff that we know will inherently improve and grow our business, because naturally that's how you feed back into, better employment benefits or more higher salaries, which are fairer for the talent. So I think all of these things correlate to top-down communication, clear objectives, and I think a lot of this stuff actually goes away, to be honest.
Also cutting through the noise though, because for example, if I think I need a new CRM, for example, and I Google CRMs, and then the algorithms know what I'm looking for, so then they're like, hey, have you thought about this one? And me, naturally, I'm very easily distractible, so I'm like, and it's scarcity, like, okay, maybe I don't have the best one, and then you start engaging with people, and on LinkedIn people have ideas and other blogs. So again, I think human nature, we do overcomplicate things, we get distracted, there's a lot of noise out there, there's a lot of hype, and we're also trying to decipher between what is hype and what is generally going to add value. Do you think have you seen that come up quite a lot? Yeah,
magpie syndrome, you kind of said it earlier. It's like, which is the new feature? Again, I think that comes down to more, and I think it's actually quite an interesting challenge. And I've even felt this in my own career sometimes, which is, and it's kind of a negative thing that often gets asked about, if you do an interview or someone says to you, like, what's something that you're, it's a bad thing about you or something you'd like to change or be positive. And we used to do this at Google quite a lot, which was, people would constantly be innovating and trying to change. And I was more in the camp of like, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But even that's not great, I actually think, for innovation, but for periods of time, it's probably quite good, particularly in reducing waste. And so I think for people that are inherently looking at, okay, I'm in the same job, maybe I'm delivering the same KPI performance, maybe I'm improving incrementally based on tops down, I'm selling more shoes as that example. How do I stand out? How do I do something different in my business that's maybe going to get me that promotion, or maybe going to, inherently make me get more enjoyment from my role? And I think that's when, like, the magpie syndrome, to coin your phrase, comes in and says, maybe it's a new feature in the product that I use every day that inherently maybe doesn't sell more shoes. And so that's the tricky part. And actually, I think if you go back to my original point around 17 products being adopted in a company, there is no sort of there's no limit to the amount of tech that you could adopt, and there's fantastic salespeople in all of these companies that are doing a great job in selling to you. So really trying to go back to that core objective is my number one advice to any business.
I need to take that on. I just say no to demos now because I cannot trust myself. I know I'm going to be like, I need this. Yes, I need this. And salespeople are easily sold to as well. Yeah,
absolutely. And some of those, I've got really interested in some of those like early iterations of, I know we were just chatting about agentic and agents in the kind of prelude, but some of those automation tools. So I think like Gemini at Google just brought out, which is the most amazing feature, which is, that arduous process of, are you free on this day? Can I set up this in your calendar? Calendly kind of solved that a little bit, but now it will just automatically look at the email, find the date, and then you can literally just tap one button and it adds it for both of you in the calendar. And so that's just like a really simple thing that I think is like amazing. Don't need new tech. It kind of drives efficiency, but you're right, like looking for those ways of trying to find a sort of continuous improvement or efficiency, I think is going to be the name of the game over the next 18 months when it comes to new tech.
And better for data and sustainability, and we'll come on to that, Scope 3 and their amazing mission. But people don't understand, like obviously huge companies, they're, 17 platforms, data probably duplicated, but on a day-to-day, it was a company that I engage with, and on their signature, they say, I'm not going to reply because of the data. So they just, because we don't use emojis much on Outlook, but you can respond with a thumbs up. And not many people do, but they've said we do that because we don't want more data. Now you could say that's not going to make a difference, but if everyone had that mindset of, do I really need to reply to that? Do I really need another photo? Do I really need to store this? Every little helps, Tesco
I agree.
says it, but these big companies, I think data and the sustainability and the environmental impact is something that I've really started to think about as of last year. We had someone on the podcast, Francis Rafferty, and wow, I do not think people think about data as being a tangible thing that needs to be stored, because it's out of sight, out of mind in these massive data centres. So when is it something that really came onto your radar?
Yeah, good question. I've actually done that awkward thing as well of like giving a love heart emoji to an Outlook chain, and then like
I'm all for it now.
And then the chain got like a bit awkward, and there was just this overhanging of a love heart emoji. So maybe I shouldn't have done that and just replied. I think how you want to take it into your daily work practice, I think is completely up to you. Like, how much do I consider, the amount of photos I take or the amount of emails I send? If I'm being fully transparent, I probably don't think about it too much. I try and think more about like what's the macro impact I'm trying to make. I think on the kind of waste side, and I would say inherently when I started to think about sort of waste in technology and adoption in products, it actually wasn't to do with sustainability. I actually got a nice segue to that, which then led me to TAMT and then Scope 3. But for me, it was the key point was back in, I believe it was actually around COVID time. So COVID time, I was working for Google in Singapore. And then inherently what happened, we had this huge boom and bust. So I hired a bunch of people. Everybody was, hiring like crazy in technology companies. Probably a great time for your business as well. And then like naturally what started to happen was technology started to expand. Companies started to reevaluate how many people they needed, and then it almost felt like to me that the first thing to go was people, and not technology. And I know how expensive some of these licenses can be, particularly in sort of mid-market sized companies. And I thought, hey, sort of hang on a second, how about we look at where we are spending from an OPEX perspective? Is there something that could be done sort of there in technology investment versus just cutting a bunch of people, because that may be the easier thing to do. And then so I started to think about it internally at Google. Like we had a bunch of these tools that we used fractionally within the company, and I was like, I never use that, and I know how expensive that is. Probably my seat to use that on a SaaS level. And so then I started to think, okay, how do I try to sort of impact this and affect this most? And then that's what led me to think about in life post Google, like which are the companies that inherently are looking to drive reduction at scale. And I was kind of led to that being private equity companies. When they buy a bunch of companies, it's that age-old adage of private equity, come in, get rid of half the people, and then, sort of double the valuation, sell it on, which actually is not true at all. Like most of them have been going through amazing missions around creating value creation teams, looking at technology stacks. So I just thought if I could go in there, I would be able to go, 1 to 100 companies versus being sort of 1-to-1. So that was kind of the mission from Google to TAMT, and where I first got the insight of efficiency and reduction. Yeah,
that's interesting from a reduction point of view, because I think in strategy we talk a lot about technology, people, process. You should go people first, not technology first. But it's the reverse, isn't it? So when we're reducing, you are right, it's headcount. But really it's like these licenses, 1,000, it's insane. And like the relationships you have with consultancies that maybe are not delivering on what they want or or whatever, contract versus permanent staff. Why do you think that is then? Why is people the easy option?
I think it goes back to procurement. And I think the one thing I would add on here is that it's not that inherently buying technology for growth is bad. If you go back to my kind of original point, I think it's great. If you can buy and build a relationship with technology products that drive value for your business, I think that's absolutely what you should be doing. And actually, there are some products that are probably underpaid for the value they bring. There's always been this big thing in any tech revenue-based job of like, how do you do value-based pricing? Like if you speak to any founder, any startup, it's like, how do I price my product? I just don't know how. And often when you're new, you undervalue pricing. So I think to that point around the kind of value exchange, I think that's clear. But you're right, like it's easier, I think, mainly because, again, I'm guessing here, and it's never good to guess when you're a data podcast. But I think that from a C-suite level where those decisions are made, and I look at my core output as a business to, again, drive sales. So again, using the analogy, selling shoes. Maybe I know inherently the value of like 5% of my workforce more clearer, and losing that is a much easier decision for me to make than, moving my cloud server from on-prem to cloud, because it's going to save me 30%. And maybe it's a quicker decision for them to be able to do that and take that burden. And that's not an easy decision. But yeah, I just think there could be more to be done around driving the efficiency, which is, again, why I'm so passionate about it.
And like I said, we'll come back onto scope 3, but I suppose for you, going from somewhere like Google to then founding a company and joining a startup or scale up, are they? Which stage?
Scale up now,
Scale
I think.
up.
Yeah,
Exciting.
just closed Series B.
Amazing.
Last year, and actually we're invested in by Google.
Oh, wow,
not
full
my
circle.
Company, unfortunately, not my company, but yeah, Scope 3 now, my company I work for. Yes, that's amazing. So it's kind of come full circle. A lot of my friends say like you just can't avoid the big G. So it's it's all good.
So was Google, a company like Google, a big tech company, always the plan for you, or the dream, the goal?
I'll be honest, it became my goal when I kind of understood. So I think that like how I got into, I think I've listened to your podcast and I hear like all these amazing stories about like, hey, I was really good at maths, or I was, just loved insights. Like I don't inherently think that was how I got into it. I essentially left uni with the stupid thought that I could just become a consultant, because I loved, ways of like growing businesses, and I really liked the kind of like revenue side, and I saw that this big growth of these tech companies and how they're inherently changing technology stacks. I just saw a lot of opportunity in that, and then got the quick realization that if you didn't go to a red brick university, it was very hard to get into consultancies. I didn't even know what a red brick university was. So then I sort of wandered into the world of agencies land, so like big media advertising agencies, which was actually a really great learning experience, and essentially was in a role where I managed the scale and deployment of those big technology companies like Meta or Facebook at the time, Google, Twitter, early iterations of that. And I think just by seeing the capital which was allocated by those customers to those products continuing to grow, going from like 10% of a media plans, then 30-40%. And then there was this, I guess, like within the industry, like go and work for one of those top companies, it's really hard to get into. I remember all these stories about crazy interview questions at Google around tennis balls in cars. And I just thought like, look, if that's the pinnacle, maybe I've got to try and do that. And so, I guess like inherently as it grew throughout my career, I was like, I want to work there. And I think the one thing that I had when I was at Google, which again, listening to your podcasts over the last couple of weeks, is that there was often this mention of imposter syndrome. And I actually like completely have the opposite view, that it's within companies, and it's not that people shouldn't have imposter syndrome, because I think it's absolutely right to feel how you want to feel, but often you would join these big tech companies and they would maybe like mention that or push that as like, hey, it's fine to have imposter syndrome. And I kind of think of it the other way, which is, if you're good enough to have got to a point in your career where you've done really well, had loads of success, past this really hard interview process, like you should have the confidence to feel like you should be there and grow. And so I think that was my point, maybe internally about getting to Google, was maybe on paper I wasn't, the person that went to MIT or, did a bunch of years at consultancy, but I thought, why couldn't I get a job there? So that was kind of my driving and motivational factor.
And did you get asked about tennis balls in the interview
I wish
process?
I prepared.
Did you really?
Yeah, it's all about the diet. It's all about the size of the tennis ball, apparently, because if it's a training ball, they're slightly smaller and softer.
Wow. How many stages was it? Was it intense? Because I've heard this. We've had someone from Google on before, and I mean, rightly so. I suppose they've got a reputation to live up to high standards.
Yeah.
But was it as intense as you thought it would be, or were you disappointed that it was actually quite easy?
I just thought everyone was super nice. And I'd say this, but I kind of left Google. I kind of love it. I still I use all the products, love the people there. I just thought that the way that it was structured was like really, really thorough. Like they had this thing called like a STAR framework methodology, which is like situation, task, something else, and then result. Approach result. And I just thought that was such a great way of structuring how you would talk about what you did versus just like, I sold this product or I did this project that got X. So that was really good. And also I think the one thing I would say that when people think about Google is most of the roles are sales roles, to be honest. Like it's a big advertising company. Yes, there's like the really smart people in DeepMind and like product, but 90+% of the revenue, or 80 maybe now, is advertising, or now cloud's kind of growing. But all of that comes from salespeople. So what they're really looking for in those interviews is, are you able to deal with ambiguity, like change the role, and then continue to drive performance for clients, which inherently leads to more money for Google. So I actually quite liked the interview process.
I bet you learned a ton there as well, like these, because I've never worked at a big company, and I think obviously I like the startup world myself. That excites me. I think the purpose and passion behind those organisations is often very rich. But I think, wow, there's so many amazing minds in a room, an office, an organisation, and you learn through osmosis as well. It's not just you and me directly conversing. It's like those people around, how they engage, how they give I don't even know, I can't imagine it. Like, what was it like to actually be in such a large environment?
Yeah, so I was obviously in Singapore as well. So this is a kind of a unique thing for me in the fact that, being English in the office I was a minority. And so that was even better in a way because, I was not only learning through different experiences, cultures, languages. It was also, that melting pot of talent. But I would say that there is back to that hiring policy of like dealing with ambiguity and being able to manage that. There was no one there that made you feel like they were super intelligent. Does that make sense? And it's kind of, that's why I go back to the imposter syndrome thing. It's like, you're all kind of meant to be there together and collaborate and grow. And that's kind of what the ethos of the company is, also why they've done so well, right? But no, some fantastic. I remember like the girl, like one of my really close colleagues, like she studied, I think like nuclear science or something at uni. I think it's a long way from studying marketing at Bournemouth. So I think it's, I think there was those wow moments, but you just had to like really double down in my opinion, and what I've coached a lot of people on and mentored, just say like, no, believe in yourself. You're there for a reason. And I think if you did that, you did really, really well.
Yeah, good for you. And then what made you want to transition then to the startup world? Yeah,
I think, I was really fortunate enough that in parallel to Google, I got a lot of opportunities through that to maybe like help and advise startups in Asia. I kind of started that journey in London, and then in Singapore, and then I started to invest in startups. And really my ethos around that was invest or advise in something that I can actually help and not just be a drag. I actually advise most startups to take less advice, which is quite interesting when I'm inherently doing that. But take less advice. If I think I can help, I will help. And I really push back to say like, look, don't give me sort of like any advisory options, or don't let me invest if I don't think I can help. So that's what that really got me into this mindset of, okay, I'm seeing founders struggle every day, like having to drive objectives. And it was kind of that experience of seeing that enjoyment and that self-fulfillment alongside that nagging feeling of, hey, I think there's an opportunity here to help companies reduce technology waste and tech stack efficiency. And so that was kind of the two and two got put together. And then when I moved back to London, I just thought, let's do it. Like, why not? I have the opportunity to, and learn a bunch in that period as well.
I bet you did. So you advise people not to take advice?
Yes.
Right. Well, going back to the magpie syndrome.
Sounds ridiculous, but it's
I
true.
think I can relate to that, and you can obviously explain your thoughts behind it, but I've been given way too much. Again, me, as a person, I just do things. Like, I take action, and that is a strength, but it's also a weakness, because I'm like, great idea, I'll go and execute on that right away. And it really hasn't served me, like really hasn't served me, because I've got far too much advice. But it's so difficult to balance. Like, you know, you don't want to struggle with a decision yourself, but maybe, I suppose it would be interesting to hear your thoughts around it. But I have been on that side where I've taken on board way too much, and the results haven't been great, to be honest.
Yeah, and particularly if you're a sort of product or engineering led founder, and there are like unique aspects to product, and so I can give you an example, and who absolutely love that I'm talking about this. So one of our portfolio companies is they're an AI real estate agent, and so what they're trying to do is like improve the admin layer of a estate agency called Four Walls, and inherently everybody in their life has either bought or sold a house, or would like to, or has rented, so they know the pain points in that process. So whenever he's speaking to somebody about that, everybody has an idea of what you can solve. So it's, you know, do you go and open a mortgage business to like help, or do you do the connectors there? Do you look at ways of finding really good builders in the area and do a connection with Checker Trade, for example? And so all of these things are actually amazing ideas, and lots of people want to advise him to go after that route. But if he does that, he goes away from that core mission. And I sort of speak about it earlier around, you know, big conglomerates having that core mission, core objective, which is transferred down. I think it's the same for a sort of pre-seed startup. And so that's why I always just say, like, really, really stick to your guns. Like, you got to this point because you had a really good idea, and the more advice you take along that journey, it may dilute you away from that goal.
But then again, there is such good advice out there that you don't know is there. It's just waiting to be given.
I obviously say listen to my advice. No, I agree. It's just the balance. It's it's not to take no advice, it's to take less advice.
Yes, and stay true to your purpose.
Correct.
Like, if you know it's a good product, a good service, then just
absolutely
be strong in that belief. Yeah. Okay, no, that's interesting, because we don't get that advice much. It's like network, listen to everybody, take all this advice. But I do think someone like me, my personality, that is not good advice, actually.
No, of course. And so you will get so much insight, and maybe you'll get the insight of taking all this advice that you're triggering within yourself, that actually I'm not getting any energy from networking. I actually think having a really, really good network is like the best career advice I would give. So I need to caveat that. Like,
we do need to caveat that.
Yeah, being out there and networking is very, very important. But just being structured about it, like meeting people for the sake of meeting people. If you're a founder, I don't think is the best advice, to be honest. And also, like, if you're looking to raise money, which is really important to startups as well, like, if you have a really, really good product, you have a good mission, like, inherently that first step of getting in front of people, yes, it's important to do that, but you'll notice that even within those conversations and networking, that some investors are better than others, and the advice they'll take you on. And so we've worked with companies that had a really core product, got into like an accelerator program, and then 6 months into the program are like, they want to change my product completely. This is not what I was driven to do. And then that usually doesn't end very well. So there's just kind of intricacies. So just don't listen to everyone. Would be
Have you been burnt with that then before, by taking on too much advice? That
do you know what? And I did actually when I launched Tamped, the kind of consultancy, which was specifically targeting private equity to reduce technology waste. So it was actually quite true, but there was kind of two lanes to it, which was, do you go and target the capital allocators of private equity, work with their value creation teams, and then go into advising the portfolio companies, all of which just creates like 4 or 5 stakeholders that you need to, you know, sell to, convince, do work with? Or do you go on the M&A side, like merger and acquisition side, and then sit on the due diligence area of the business, which, to be honest, when leaving Google, was completely alien to me. You know, I was selling and working with data and analytics products and solving lifetime value for big brands and customers. I wasn't thinking about, you know, EBITDA and M&A. But it was an amazing learning experience. And so I got multiple advice, which was like M&A is the best route, go and work for value creation. But in the end, it just took me to a point where I was doing both pretty averagely. We were doing well, we were getting loads of business in, but I couldn't get to a point where I could service both. And then I had to make the super critical decision to be like, okay, do I raise money and try and go after both? And then had the hours long conversations like with friends and family and my wife to say, you know, if I raise money and I have that guilt of managing that for other people, do I love it enough to do that, or can I maybe just like pivot the business, focus more on the value creation, work with the private equity side to ignore the M&A piece, and then inherently that company can work by itself. So I necessarily didn't have to be involved in that, and our sort of joint venture fund, our engineers can still work in those relationships, and I can, you know, maybe take a back seat and be more of an advisory to the fund. And then when I took that step back and was like, hey, I've got much more time in my hands now, like what do I actually want to do with this time, is when I found Scope 3, which aligned to the mission of Tamped, but just did it in a way bigger and better way.
Yeah. So how did you find Scope 3 then? Were you headhunted, or did you reach out to them? Or
so it was funny. So one of my a guy who I worked with at Google, we did the same role. So he did UK and I did Singapore. So we'd often be on these calls and get off, and you know, we'd be like, "Did you understand that? Like, what do I actually need to do to drive this forward?" And so he left Google at the same time as me, and so. What we found with Tamped was, and sort of leading to the sustainability piece and efficiency, was when you would do projects for funds to reduce technology stacks and optimize for their portfolio companies, that was actually had like an additional benefit for the fund, because they could then be shown to be, you know, also reducing or improving ESG levels within the fund, which then made them much more attractive for LPs, liquidity providers, to put more money in. So and so that story for me, it ticked every single box. It was like reducing tech, helping companies grow, also sustainable. And so that narrative on the sustainability part really landed to where Tim, my colleague from Google, left to join Scope 3. And so we were sort of comparing notes still, even though we were in different companies. And so he kind of saw the tail end of me being like, okay, where do I focus my time? And he was really great to say, look, you should really consider us, because although we're, you know, more focused on advertising for now, and we're kind of expanding out, I think your mission of Tamped, of efficiency, equally to sustainability, is really ours too. And you know, we have more funding, we have great people, and you don't have to work, you know, 15-hour days necessarily to be able to do it. And so, yeah, I was really, really fortunate that somebody actually didn't take, or was offered the role that I got, dropped out last minute, and it was just the perfect timing.
Stars aligned.
Yeah, yes, it was very, very quick, and I'm very fortunate for the opportunity.
Yeah, no, it looks like a very cool company. So their mission is to create efficiency and decarbonize the advertising and media ecosystem.
Correct.
So quite a mission.
Yeah.
Quite a bold mission.
Yeah.
Are there many people doing this? Do you have competitors or?
Yeah, we do actually. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. So like the category within advertising, I would say, was maybe hot. I mean, people will argue this point, so I don't want to get it wrong, but it's maybe like, in reality, like 5 years old. So Scope 3 is, I think, we had a 3-year anniversary recently. So there was companies in the category before in different guises. But yeah, sustainability in advertising became maybe like a big talking point in like 2022, 2023. And so it started around. So across continental Europe, there are competitors. And actually it's weird, like we see them as kind of partners creating the category. It's hard if they're you know, the mission-driven company doing really well. We want them to ultimately meet the goals of reducing carbon impact of ads. So, but we're also, to my earlier point, we're there to make money. So, and help customers. So, like new category-ish. We think it's kind of really established now, and we're expanding our product suite. But yeah, it's a very interesting space, and we really from our two, I mean, there's multiple founders, but kind of two of our main founders in the industry are fantastic, Anne and Brian, and they've been really able to move and push us and pivot us really quickly to really expand our reach. That's why we've got amazing data integrations with all the big tech players, as well as amazing brand partnerships and agencies. So we've got great coverage, which enables us to scale really quickly.
Yeah, brilliant. And I suppose sustainability and profitability don't always in people's heads go hand in hand necessarily.
Yeah.
But why should companies, aside from it's the right thing, but why should they join you in your mission, I suppose, to want to decarbonise and be sustainable?
Yeah, it's a very good point. So, and I talk about this quite a lot in my like day to day. And so I never ever go into like a meeting with prospective clients or an existing clients or partners and talk about sustainability as like a singular.
Yeah.
It has to be inherently productive for whatever that business is trying to achieve. And that's why we always talk about it at Scope 3 that it's all about sustainable performance. So everything you do has to then have a correlation. And so there's some really interesting examples of this in advertising specifically. So there's this concept of media quality. I don't know if you've ever I've heard of it before, but it's essentially bunch of different data signals that enables you to evaluate how effective each of your channels are. Right. And so they could be a variety of things. So it could be I've served an ad or I've run a campaign with a particular website or social platform. How viewable were all of my ads? This concept of viewability, because some ads can load below the fold or above the fold, but you may still pay for them. It could be brand safety, for example. So did my ad get served against any negative or harmful content which could affect the brand equity of my business? So you think Disney, they don't want to be seen against anything too controversial because it's bad for their brand equity. And so there are a bunch of these other metrics that have launched, I would say, over the last sort of maybe 4 to 5 years, attention being one as well. So how much attention is my ad actually having versus just being seen? And so we think sustainability is kind of a core foundational part of that. And so when brands assess their channel mix, so for example, I've chosen 5 different advertising partners here and 5 there. Both of them have sold the same amount of shoes, but one is much more or much less carbon intrusive from an ad delivery standpoint. Maybe if I'm corporately aligned to being more sustainable, it would make sense for me to optimize towards that. And it's not the fact that you should never work with that 5 that potentially is not or more carbon intrusive. It's that how do you work with them as a partner to help them to optimize either what you're buying or how can they improve the ecosystem. So doing that is a real sort of partnership between buyer side and sell side to be able to do that. And we think that naturally what that does is it reduces waste. So inherently you're not buying stuff that doesn't drive performance and is non-sustainable. And then clients get better results, which is great. The sell side ultimately makes more profitability, to your point. And it's doing it for a good reason. And so that is a much better way, I think, to go to market than just trying to chuck more tech into a bloated ecosystem that maybe doesn't even drive more performance.
Yeah, of course it is. And it's a win-win, I suppose.
Win-win if there is.
I do think, unfortunately, some companies, though, it's the same with DE&I, which we're very passionate about as a company. And I know in America, there's been real pushback on DE&I initiatives because I don't think people understand the fundamental, like it's about belonging. It's the right thing to do. But no, we're not just sending people for the sake of it. They're the best and they happen to be diverse because we've made that concerted effort, but we all know that that's where innovation happens. But I think some people see sustainability, D&I, and they're like, it's a tick box, and it does have that. I don't know if it's become like over corporatized. I don't know if I even know that's a word, but I think there's a stigma now attached to it, unfortunately, and people just do it because they think it's the right thing to do, but they actually don't care or they don't understand why it's important, I suppose. I think there's a barrier. As soon as you hear the word, they're like, oh, yeah, that's not for us.
Yeah, I think that is probably what maybe that happens in some industries. I've actually seen it differently in ads. Yeah. I'll be honest. Most of the clients that we work with are inherently invested in making sustainability an output of performance. So back to my original mission. And maybe I'm biased because I'm speaking to the brands that are constantly thinking about it. But like, as long as I think like ground zero is utilizing technology that can measure sustainability or buying more sustainable media, it has to have at least the base level not had a negative impact on why you're buying that in the first place.
Yeah.
And so anything above that to me is just like additive, right? So, and actually it's a really nice way to the point around even utilizing data and being able to integrate more data into your decision making. More insights, the better, right? And so what we have found, again, looking at some examples, is that if you are looking at the ad delivery of a publisher or a broadcaster, and even, and they admit this, I work with them very openly, there's some like technology that they use which is obsolete or they don't use anymore, and it's just kind of their blow that they haven't got to the point of fixing it. And actually by reducing that out, it has a positive impact on the carbon output of the campaign.
Right, yeah.
And so sometimes it's a case of like, oh, this is great for us as well because it's corporately aligned. So I think marketing, particularly with a lot of the great work that Ad Net Zero have done, it's just kind of like the group which is really championing this across Europe and the world. They're really making it like stick and tied to that performance. I think it will stay around versus just being a nice to have.
Yeah, good. And I was going to ask you a question on that as well, because we are Let's Talk Data. So how can data play a part in helping businesses track and reduce carbon footprint then?
Yes, it's a very good question. I love also that I'm inherently doing this, that I'm quite passionate about how data can drive like business performance and revenue. So I always go down that route of talking that. But yeah, I'm glad to get into like the actual data side of it. So the point around sustainability for businesses is that data obviously gives you the vehicle to understand like as and how you're performing. So I can maybe talk to Scope 3 products and also just generally in the industry. So we have like a measurement product. What that measurement products do is, and you can actually log on and anybody can use it. We're an open source model, which is great. And actually some of our competitors use our data set in that regard as well. So the data is foundational to being able to like derive the insight to then be able to make the change. So really simple. If I am buying TV advertising or connected television advertising, and I'm buying a video ad on the Daily Mail, for example, or any publisher site, being able to share that data and come back out, it's just a really interesting way to enable the brand and agency in some cases to optimize. So without that, you couldn't get the insight. And how we look at sustainability, for example, in ads is we look at stuff like how big was the file size, like when was it served, how many people bid to like serve an ad against that person, and all of this has a higher carbon impact. Yeah. So again, not having that foundational channel level measurement, it just would make the reduction strategy impossible.
And how much, because I understand you've been in data, I suppose, for a while, how much have you seen it change from an organisational point of view? So you've been interacting with it on a daily basis, like many do, but now there's been a real shift where businesses are becoming data driven, not just the data department. Yeah. Have you seen that journey?
Yeah, I remember the days where like I was the person, I had last 2 minutes of a slide presentation to a client to talk about like analytics of a campaign, and then it's
it'll dominate, won't it?
Well, yeah, now you're at the front, and I think Google really drove that. I think so. They invested really heavily on like data and insights teams, and all the big tech companies did that, which I think was super smart because it then enabled the clients to drive their maturity. I also then think that like one of the inherent ways that that's accelerated as well is like data visualization tools. So actually it was really hard to work out, okay, what's marketing doing, what's product doing. So a lot of products in that space and the data pipelines to be able to do that have got cheaper and better and easier. So I think the application of taking data from a corporate lens and making it really digestible for decision makers to use it and make decisions has massively changed, and everything you do now is data driven. We even see it from a product development level. I think from actually the sourcing of the data and then how you process that, and then the insights that you get out of it, I still think there's like probably slightly more work to be done on like how sort of like how fresh is the data, how recent is it, how accurate is that insight, do I need to know everything? I don't know if that's been figured out, but I'm sure AI will probably have a big way of sort of saying that to make it easier for everybody.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. How would you see, I'm sure it is already disrupting the industry, but how do you see, I suppose, AI evolving with the industry?
I think we're at the phase where more products are being developed, which goes back to my original statement of, one person logs into 17 tools to do their job and doesn't, use any of the features because it's impossible to within the day. I think we're at that phase where it's like build. So let's all build new products and systems for efficiency. And to your point, it's quite hard to choose. So I think that we will get to a point, and I'm early in my education and reading journey on potentially how software businesses sort of open source or enable some of their key product features within APIs, so then you can like build your ideal product. So what that would mean would be like, I really like this feature from Salesforce, for example, but I want this feature from HubSpot and I want this. Could I build my own tool to be able to do that?
So more bespoke, more tailored.
Exactly. Like API, using API access or maybe like a SaaS license, and then build your own bespoke product using multiple features, which most of them say will be quite difficult to do because of like walled gardens, or it might lose their competitive advantage on that product feature set. But as building product becomes easier, that's naturally kind of the next step. Or maybe you do it using their agents, and so maybe that's the way they keep you in the ecosystem. But I see that's where it's going, where there's just way too many products. It's hard to decide what to do to really drive the goal. And then there'll be a tipping point, I think, where a decision maker says, look, I just want something that does this. Go and build me, based on everything in the market, the thing that could do that in the most effective way.
Yeah, so maybe, will these be off-the-shelf products in the sense that a particular business has designed them, or maybe more off-the-shelf but also tailored at the same time, do you think, or a little bit of both?
A bit of both. Also, like, you may not want to, like, some people just don't have time to think about it, right? So does the head of ICT, a big conglomerate, have enough time in the week to think about like what is the optimal CRM tool that they should be using?
Good question.
Yeah, as long as they're selling more products. I think these things come when like business performance or like building brand affinity or whatever the business objective is. But yeah, it's a very interesting time. It's kind of exciting and scary at the same time, I would say. And if I was maybe entering the industry or any industry now, I would find it quite difficult to work out like where do I actually want to play a role in this. I always like to stick to kind of the business and revenue side, and I learned that very quickly, that I was using data every day, and then I just found that either there was always someone better than me at data science, or then there was these new titles coming in of like sales engineers, which is like a big thing, and I sort of very quickly realized that my niche was maybe much more, how do I take really complex systems and simplify it so that anybody can make a really quick decision. And I think that skill won't die.
So I think be aware of your strengths as well.
Exactly. So how do you as a person like focus on like what my strengths are and what do I think's not going to be replaced by AI and go for that.
Good point. Well, we're going to move on to the quick fire data lightning round.
Yeah, amazing.
First one, what is a myth in data that you'd like to debunk? A common myth.
A common myth, I would say that more data is better. Like often there's talk about we just need as much data as possible. And I think, yes, in some instances, that's right. I think if you depend in certain scenarios, like it's probably not better. And so like to give you an example, if I'm a brand and I'm trying to, if I'm a CPG brand, for example, and I did a lot of work with CPG brands, and they would want to maybe sell mass consumer products, and their whole big problem statement was I don't have enough access to data to be able to sell more toothpaste, for example, and they would like really invest so much time in collecting more data. And And I think if they got all of the data in the world, it may not help them sell more toothpaste versus just doing a really, really good television ad. And I know that might be going back to my problem statement of like, I don't want to just innovate for innovation's sake, but I think sometimes too much data, too much insight can be a negative.
Well, there's a theme here, you know, like overcomplicating, too much advice.
Maybe it's just because I'm simple.
Things simple.
It's because I'm simple, I think.
No, you have a very good way of making the complex simple, I think, and that's a skill in itself.
Thank you.
Next one, name a book, event or podcast that every data enthusiast should explore.
I really like the All In podcast. Do you know All In podcast? It's an American podcast. It never talks about stuff in the UK. Not really, but it's got Chamath Palihapitiya. He's like ex-Meta. David Sachs, who's now, I think, the crypto czar in the US. He comes on. So they just get really good people on. They talk about they're kind of inherently venture capitalists, and they talk about how data and like really amazing companies get formed from data, and then like how those data companies then get capital allocated to them. So that's really interesting. And I think if I was again a data person looking to build my career, I would be looking, okay, what are the key things that are going to get capital allocators excited, and how do I build a career in that? So I think that would be one I'd highly recommend to listen to.
All In. Say that again.
It's called the All In podcast.
All In. Okay, I'll check it out. Next one, data is the key to. Finish that sentence.
Incrementality.
Good word.
I got it in, didn't I? I did say I'd get it in. I heard this from the first time I heard this being used was it was actually when I was at one of my agency groups. One of my old clients, he actually sold shoes. Actually, it's probably why I keep
the shoe analogy.
Keep using
and
the shoe analogy.
And
he just used to talk about incrementality all the time, and like it used to transcend through our team. And I know it kind of sounds like a bit of a lofty word, but I just believe in it. I think that like if you have access to information that can help you get incremental performance, which ultimately then drives incremental revenue for your business, or like being able to place more like greater people in better jobs, I just think that it's like key to that. Just don't overdo it. Just only get as much as you need to really be able to
keep it simple.
Otherwise you just create waste and you get a bunch of stuff you don't need, and then you find yourself in that constant spiral of maybe not sort of driving as the greatest performance that you could.
Yeah, good one. We've not had that before. And next one, you did touch on this before, and I thought that was really interesting in terms of the themes. But what is a piece of advice you would give to someone just starting their data career? Yeah,
so I'll kind of go back to them a little bit. So find out where capital is being allocated. We're printing more money than ever in the world.
Follow the money.
Yeah, right. We're printing more money than ever in the world. That money goes to people that usually like to buy assets or allocate money, and then look at what the problems they're trying to solve with that, and see how you can fit into that. Networking point that we mentioned, I think it's really, really important, but don't network for the sake of networking. Always have a value exchange that you're looking to offer. People are busy, and so that's really important. And then try and find like what you're both passionate about but also good at. I think that's going to be really important. And usually if you're passionate about something, you are good at it. But I'm passionate about golf, but I'm not very good at golf. So I don't think that always works.
No, that is solid advice. That is very good. And last one, name a data buzzword that you love to hate.
I think I kind of said it earlier, but I'll spin it and say I actually don't dislike...
You're a positive guy.
Yeah, positive.
You don't hate data words.
No, I don't. I love incrementality. So how about that? No, I tell you the one I don't like, and it's not that actually just came to me now. It's not that it's actually not really a buzzword, to be honest. But I never really liked data lake. That was always a big thing for me. I just like, and whenever I heard data lake, I just thought like, what are we doing with this? Like, what happens in the lake? Is there fish? I don't know. And so, not that there's really great data lake products. Like, I get what they do, but just like that concept of a lake just never really sat very well with me.
The best conversation I had was someone, they're really on in data strategy, and she was telling me about the state of the data, and she called it a swamp. I was like, these water analogies.
Or wave. Brilliant. Like, there's always like data wave. It's just, I guess I feel like you don't need to make it any sexier anymore. Like, AI is kind of doing that for everybody. So just keep it simple is kind of my message.
I love that. Well done.
Thank you very much.
That's it. That's the wrap.